To anyone looking in from the outside, the Patterson family seemed to have it all: a picturesque suburban home, three healthy kids, and parents who were blissfully in love. At the heart of this enviable family unit was Tom, a doting husband and dedicated father who moved mountains to keep his wife and children happy. Whether it was working late nights to earn the promotions and raises that allowed them a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle, or getting down on the floor to build elaborate Lego villages with the twins Jake and Ryan, Tom had an endless reservoir of energy and patience when it came to his family. His wife Maggie often marveled at how he was the first one up early on Saturday mornings to make the kids Mickey Mouse pancakes, and the last one refusing to go to bed until their youngest daughter Emma was tucked in with her favorite stuffed bunny. With his tall, chiseled frame, sharp dress sense, and disarmingly warm demeanor, Tom could have had his pick of girlfriends back when he and Maggie first met in college. But from the moment they locked eyes at that frat party, he'd only had eyes for her. Tom's fraternity brothers would joke that he was utterly whipped, turning down invitations to rage at the bars in favor of studying all weekend so he could take Maggie for a Chili's date on Sunday. But he considered himself the luckiest guy in the world to have snagged such a brilliant, compassionate, and smokin' hot girl as his future wife. Fast forward a decade, and that feeling had only grown stronger with three kids in a rambling house in the suburbs. While Tom's devotion to keeping their family happy and provided for was evident, Maggie appeared to be equally content in her role as a doting wife and mother. With an effortless grace, she would whip up nourishing homemade meals, shuffle the kids between their countless activities, and ensure the house ran like a well-oiled machine, all while flashing her megawatt smile. Maggie's behavior projected an image of idyllic domesticity. She religiously kept up with her book club, volunteered as class mom for the kids' school functions, and donned pearls and pastels like they were painted on her hourglass figure. She seemed to take immense pride in curating the perfect upscale, upper-middle-class existence that privileged suburban families aspire to. Maggie's Instagram was a perfectly curated feed documenting their flawless family adventures, smiling-faced at Disneyland, marshmallow-stuffed s'mores around a blazing backyard fire pit, and tastefully decorated holiday celebrations. With her natural beauty, likable personality, and apparent proficiency at managing both a household and sculpted physique, Maggie was the envy of the neighborhood. Always gracious and welcoming, she would greet Tom home from work with a warm hug and kiss, keeping him at arm's length just long enough for him to admire her form in a fitted sundress. If he was lucky, she might teasingly chide, "Hands off, mister," in that playfully flirtatious tone she knew drove him wild. To all outward appearances, the Pattersons were relationship goals personified, a power couple with the world at their feet. At the center of Tom and Maggie's seeming marital bliss were their three adorable children, 8-year-old twin boys Jake and Ryan, and 5-year-old daughter Emma. Raising the rambunctious trio was a full-time job in itself, but it was one Tom and Maggie appeared to relish with unwavering patience and love. With the high-energy twins, every day brought new adventures and messes to clean up. Whether it was finger-painting mustaches on each other or converting the backyard into a massive mud pit after a rare rainstorm, Jake and Ryan were in constant motion. But Tom and Maggie took it all in stride, threatening discipline through stifled laughter before inevitably joining in on the fun themselves. They made an incredible parenting team, Tom playing the rugged role of roughhouse dad, wrestling his sons into exhaustion, while Maggie applied her gentler touch as snuggle mom, cuddling up with her boys to read bedtime stories. If Jake and Ryan were bundles of hyperactive chaos, their little sister Emma was the angel that somehow balanced it all out. With her pigtails, pinafore dresses, and a precocious streak, Emma was every inch the stereotypical daddy's girl. She would light up with a sunshine smile whenever Tom arrived home from work, immediately clambering into his arms for hugs and kisses. Though she absorbed his undivided attention like a rosy-cheeked sponge, Emma was just as enmeshed in the family unit, gamely following her brothers on their imaginary adventures through the backyard while also sneaking away to bake mud peas in her playhouse kitchen alongside Mom. To the outside world, the Pattersons painted an enviable picture of a tight-knit family unit basking in middle-class suburban prosperity. For years, Tom's world remained blissfully intact. His high-powered job as a corporate finance manager provided comfortably for his family's upscale suburban lifestyle, while Maggie's dedication to homemaking gave him the idyllic household he'd always craved. He had no reason to suspect any cracks beneath the sunny, family-centric facade they projected. That is, until a passing remark from Tom's wisecracking office buddy, Jim, warned their weekly golf scramble. "Hey Tom, I hope that youngest kid of yours isn't actually your daughter," Jim had quipped between shanked drives, his cackling laugh instantly betraying the jesting nature of his paternity swipe. By all appearances, it was a crude joke, the kind of locker room banter about clueless husbands and wandering wives that got worked into every prize-giving speech at these corporate haunts. Still, the mere suggestion caused Tom's blood to run cold for a fleeting moment. He quickly dismissed the intrusive thought, forcing out a hearty chuckle. "With the crazy genes in my family, I'd be relieved if little Emma didn't take after me," Tom retorted, his jovial response masking the slight stir of unease Jim's barb had planted. Of course, it was just guy talk, the kind of lowbrow prodding he'd endured for years thanks to Maggie's obvious foxiness compared to his more modest looks. There was no way his beautiful wife, devoted mother to their 3 perfect children, would ever betray him like that. Was there? Though Tom quickly brushed off Jim's crass comment, it seemed to burrow into his subconscious like a niggling splinter. He started noticing little things about Maggie's behavior that had previously escaped his attention, subtle quirks that, once recognized, set off warning bells he couldn't unhear. The first red flag was her newfound possessiveness over her phone. Maggie had always been an effusive sharer when it came to her digital life, leaving her iPhone's messaging and photo streams unlocked and devices scattered carelessly around the house. Suddenly, Tom noticed her cradling the phone against her body whenever he entered a room, quickly blackening the screen or angling it away from his line of sight if he approached. When he casually asked about it one night after the kids were asleep, she brushed it off as simply being more conscious about privacy due to all the identity theft in the news lately. Along with her guarded phone habits, there was Maggie's primping obsession. She had always taken pride in her appearance as a former college cheerleader, but the immaculate hair, makeup, and expensive outfits she started favoring were more befitting a rodeo drive socialite than a suburban housewife. Date nights once reserved for pulled-together sundresses now saw Maggie strutting out of the bathroom in skin-tight cocktail frocks, eyes smoky and lips painted a daring crimson that could stop traffic. When Tom remarked she seemed to be taking things up a notch for their low-key evenighting plans, she just winked and replied, "Never hurts to look your best for your man." As the weeks went on, Tom couldn't shake the knot of dread tightening in his gut. The subtle signs were mounting, and his mistrust deepened with each lingerie-clad selfie he accidentally glimpsed on Maggie's phone before she rushed to lock it. He knew that covetous look, the coy, provocative sparkle she once reserved for seducing him in their newlywed days, but it wasn't directed at her husband anymore. Tom started sleeping fitfully, imagining Maggie's ringtone going off with a new explicit message from her mysterious lover, while she laid spent and sated beside him. He'd jolt awake, chest pounding, to find her peacefully slumbering with a contented smile. An ominous sense of impending betrayal loomed over their once sacred marital bed. During his daily breakfasts with the kids, Tom found himself scrutinizing Maggie's face for any hint of guilt or deceit as she cheerfully chatted and dished out pancakes. Her sunny domesticity seemed a cruel facade mocking him. The woman who'd once been his sheltering harbor of trust and intimacy was now a choppy sea of secrets threatening to pull him under. Tom's gut knew the truth. His perfect life was about to capsize. The breaking point came when Tom was filing that year's taxes and stumbled across credit card statements tucked in Maggie's cluttered desk drawer. At first glance, he recognized the American Express embossed with both their names, a long-standing joint account they'd opened as newlyweds. But something made the hairs on his neck prickle. Maggie had always been meticulous about finances, so why were monthly statements carelessly shoved in a drawer instead of neatly filed? Tom's suspicion proved well-founded as he rifled through the crumpled paperwork. Unmistakable charges from upscale hotels dotted the statements, often clustered on weekday afternoons when Maggie claimed she was staying late to catch up on work. His gut turned to lead as he realized the implications. But it was the lingering scent of Maggie's musky perfume clinging to the papers that landed like a knockout punch. She hadn't even bothered hiding her affairs from their home. Feeling dizzy, Tom collapsed back into the desk chair, the statements fluttering around him like ashes of his innocence. Interspersed among the hotel fees were lingerie web orders from tawdry retailers, Strupe little negligees, and peekaboo teddies proudly modeled by vacant-eyed vixens on the skimpily designed sites. He couldn't hold back the tears at this garish proof of his wife's deceptions and debauchery. Worse, all her indecent purchases had been bankrolled by the very money he worked himself to the bone providing. With his newfound cash trail evidence, Tom's mind raced with the sickening realization that Maggie's dalliances extended far beyond fleeting hotel trysts. There had to be more to this sordid web she'd spun. He needed to uncover the full scope of her betrayal, no matter how much it gutted him. Tom began meticulously tracking Maggie's car with a GPS logging device he purchased online and covertly installed. At first, the upscale suburb locations she visited on her working late evenings made an awful sense. Discreet rendezvous points to indulge her affair in anonymity. But as he charted more data points over the weeks, an unsettling pattern emerged with no logical justification. There was no reason for Maggie to repeatedly linger in those posh residential neighborhoods unless she had a more permanent domestic arrangement there. The agonizing idea that his wife may have established a full-blown second home and alternate family sickened Tom to his core. He could maybe cope with her indulging a cheap fling, but learning she'd systematically constructed an entire separate life raised terrifying questions. Just how long had this grotesque duplicity been going on? Which was the real Maggie and which the fabrication? The doting mother lounging in their kitchen or the shameless adulteress disgracing their home? Did she even love Tom at all anymore, or had she ever? Tormented by his findings, Tom began pulling at every thread of Maggie's deceit he could grasp. He installed specialized recovery software to scan her laptop, phone, and tablet backups, digging up the erased artifacts she obviously thought were safely buried. What he unearthed was a metastasizing malignancy of infidelity, scaring his heart anew with each dig into the archives. The texts and emails told an excruciatingly vivid story of systematic betrayal. Maggie's sext exchanges with her lover, Brad, literally made Tom's stomach churn with their shameless, graphic descriptions of their trysts. He saw photos she'd sent the man of herself splayed wantonly in the same lingerie he'd expensed. The negligees he now realized were Presco's indices for this Bradley creep's gratification, not his. Reading her fawning messages about how thinking of you keeps me wet all day made Tom retch. Most haunting were the intimate selfies Maggie had captured then meticulously deleted, NSFW self-portraits showcasing her body from disturbing, depraved angles obviously designed for Brad's viewing pleasure rather than her husband's. They weren't just X-rated, they completely shattered Tom's perception of the woman he thought he knew. How could the mother of his children, his committed partner of over a decade, transform into such an unabashed porn star so easily? The Maggie he knew truly was dead, calculatingly slaughtered by her own immorality. As the shock began to numb, Tom immersed himself in piecing together the sordid chronology of Maggie's transgressions. He scoured her device's location data, cross-referencing it against the credit card charges and incriminating messages. A timeline of treachery gradually took shape, each newly connected dot cementing the brutal realization that this was no fleeting indiscretion. It was a profound, transcendent betrayal over a year in the making. The earliest hotel and racy lingerie receipts dated back to summer of last year, when Maggie had been 7 months pregnant with Emma. Coupling that with the reconnaissance photos of her rendezvous home's Pottery Barn-esque nursery, a horrific uncertainty took root in Tom's gut. The timing matched far too perfectly for him to ignore the possibility that his youngest daughter may not have been his flesh and blood after all. Tears stung as Tom watched Maggie doting on baby Emma, marveling at whether those tender moments were just a put-on masking her guilt. He found himself studying the infant's features with increasing desperation, analyzing each trace of her button nose and wispy blonde locks for any resemblance to the man who'd cuckolded him so profoundly. The once pure joy of his youngest's birth became inseparable from the burning question of whether Maggie's womb and their marriage bed had been defiled by an intruder's seed. The volcano of rage and betrayal that had been building within Tom finally erupted. He would no longer be the clueless, complacent chump while Maggie flaunted her infidelity. If she wanted to trashy around like some deadbeat mistress, he'd make sure she got treated like one too. It was time to methodically dismantle her cozy double life and hit her where it would hurt most. First order of business was separating their finances, so Maggie couldn't drain another cent from the marital assets. Tom clandestinely opened a private banking account just for himself, then painstakingly siphoned off the majority of their liquid reserves from the joint accounts and investment portfolios he'd built over years of backbreaking labor. Maggie didn't seem to notice the missing funds at first, too preoccupied with servicing her boy toy Brad on the side. But when the bi-monthly card payments bounced and she was hit with overdraft fees that got her attention, Tom reveled in her panic as she realized her funnel had been cut off. No more secret bankrolls for romantic getaways and tawdry hookups. He smirked watching her grovel to beg money until payday, keeping mum about her changed circumstance. For once, the debt-ridden, deadbeat homewrecker was getting the existence she deserved. With Maggie financially kneecapped for the time being, Tom shifted his sights to confirming the plaguing paternity doubts about Emma. He quietly ordered an at-home DNA testing kit from one of the top brokers in that murky underworld. The medical vanguard of recreational genography felt like a dirty, illicit act, having to prove his own daughter's bloodline because of Maggie's sickening indiscretions. Tom bided his time until Maggie was conveniently out of the house for one of her work evenings before springing into action. He spent an agonizing hour gathering DNA samples from each of the 3 kids, psyching himself up for each indelible cheek swab. Sweet, bubbly Emma babbled happily as he brushed the sterile wand along her face, blissfully unaware of the bombshell looming over her existence. Sealing theried specimens in the vapor-locked pouch feeling like entombing the last fading sparks of his decaying marriage, Tom finally felt the righteous empowerment of shedding every last drip of illusion. No more bathing in the bleaching rays of Maggie's lies and deceptions. Only the purifying truth would remain, no matter how burdensome its weight. If she insisted on demolishing the sanctity of their family, he'd rebuild in the rubble on his own terms. Tom's vengeful obsession deepened as he anticipated the DNA results that could shatter what remained of his domestic fantasy. He began meticulously researching and procuring an array of covert recording devices, top-of-the-line electronics designed to catch even the most cautious offenders red-handed. This evidence binge was about more than just irrefutable confirmation of Maggie's crimes against their marriage. Tom craved undeniable admissions from her own mouth to fully exorcise the betrayal that was poisoning him. With almost clinical precision, Tom calibrated the hidden cameras and microphones throughout their home like medieval tempters laying merciless snares. The sophisticated device emplacement turned the atmosphere of what was once a loving sanctuary into something far more sinister, a hunting ground where Maggie's every move could be digitally recorded, analyzed, and weaponized. No room was spared from his voyeuristic garrison of surveillance, not even the marital bed where he'd pledged his undying love and fidelity. Tom's gnawing hunger for vindication made him almost giddy with anticipation each evening as he hunkered down with headphones to study the captured footage, enduring mental anguish with each haunting visual of Maggie's blasphemies unfurling. There she was receiving a lusty phone call while at the kitchen counter prepping dinner, and there caught in the act of shinnying out of lingerie his paychecks had bought, her bare skin defiling their very sheets in preparation for Brad's arrival. Every recording was a sordid, obscene nail burrowing into his heart and just fueling his unstanchable fury. With each newly captured artifact of Maggie's betrayal, Tom's thirst for retribution was stoked to fevered extremes. He spent fevered hours reviewing and cataloging the incriminating recordings, photos, receipts, and other damning ephemera into an airtight prosecutorial dossier. This meticulously assembled hubcap would be the sledgehammer to demolish the remaining vestiges of Maggie's facade once and for all. Tom fantasized endlessly about the main event, the brutal, rupturing confrontation when he'd batter Maggie with every lurid, concrete detail until her guilt was etched upon her soul. He scripted lines to bludgeon her with, every raunchy text message, every money-shot documentation of her wanton depravity, with Brad recited verbatim, until she was psychically flayed. There would be no rationalization, no mitigation, only Tom's sadistic, voyeuristic truths to shatter her. In his darkest moments, Tom could envision the thousand-yard stare draining from Maggie's eyes, as the lies were poured out with each crushing revelation. Her strangled sobs of shock and shame echoed in his mind like a symphonic overture to his triumph. This would be his meticulously plotted vengeance, his magnum opus of marital devastation wrought by her own moral squalor. Tom lived for the cathartic moment when this whore of a wife would be forced to mutely swallow the consequences she'd instigated. The date of reckoning arrived sooner than even Tom had anticipated. Maggie's reckless complacency delivered her into his meticulously prepared snare after he intercepted a gushing text from Brad about making it a night to remember. Tom felt his blood turning to ice water as he formulated the ambush, assembling his arsenal of evidence in the living room before Maggie's expected rendezvous time. When she finally sashayed and dulled to the nines, Tom was waiting in funereal silence, the trusted husband now a grim-faced curator of her shame. Without preamble, he atomically detonated years of recorded transgressions, walloping Maggie with digital video and audio recordings of her whispered profanities into Brad's ear. Footage of their naked, writhing embraces on the marital bed filled the room in visceral IMAX, the squalid dialogue and unmistakable skin-smacking raising the stench of Tom's cuckoldry. Maggie crumpled in horror as Tom methodically played back her Pandora's box of sins in chronological order. Hearing her perfumed seduction techniques and filthy between-the-sheets pillow talk dispassionately narrated from her own lips broke whatever spirit remained. Tears of remorse and revulsion carved tracks through her heavily made-up facade as Tom relished every anguished cry of agonized recognition. This was his grandstand of justice, finally being served upon the unfaithful trollop. With Maggie shattered and whimpering at his feet, Tom savored the moment of dominance before ruthlessly twisting the knife. His Jang Toll assault escalated from the auditory to the visual, a merciless bombardment of photographic exhibits showcasing her degenerate exhibitionism for Brad's approval. Explicit selfies appeared in lurid slideshow, each frame's zoom and filter emphasizing her wanton objectification in the most viscerally degrading ways. Maggie's gasps of horror and desperate pleas for mercy were met with a steely glare as Tom spelled out her new reality. He'd compiled more than enough indisputable proof to legally portray her as an unfit, abusive mother, cavorting in lingerie purchased with their children's college funds, shamelessly engaging in adulterous trysts while pregnant with Emma. Those acts alone would be grounds for permanent loss of custody in any court. Tom's voice remained chillingly even as he issued the law's implication. If she didn't submit fully to his demands for how to excise this cancerous episode, he'd systematically dismantle her maternal rights. The kids would be pulled from her as moral filiation by presenting the exhaustive catalog of her perversions. All her sickening indiscretions would be baptismal identifiers for Emma, Jack, and Steve, the neglectful mother's offspring doomed to pariah status because of her selfish choices. Shoulders shaking with sobs, Maggie could only mutely nod acceptance of this draconian reaping. With Maggie utterly cowed by his brutal evisceration, Tom proceeded to dictate the terms for her existential clemency. His conditions were as surgical as they were uncompromising, a precise excision of her depraved transgressions from his and the twins' lives, while leaving her to wallow in the squalor she'd created. The starting condition was a clean break financially and domestically. Tom would retain full ownership of their marital home, all assets and investment accounts. Not a penny of the nest egg he'd architected through years of honorable labor would subsidize Maggie's recompensed existence as a harlot divorcee. Custody of Jack and Steve, the children he knew without doubt sprang from his own seed, would be solely his as well. Maggie's only crumbs would be her tainted legacy, the daughter gourmet organic from her whorish insemination with Brad. Emma would be exiled with her, the living embodiment of her moral recklessness. Beyond that, Tom made clear Maggie could expect no further considerations from him, financially or paternally. She'd be untangled from his universe as surgically as a malignant tumor. The sheer imperiousness of Tom's terms bludgeoned what little remained of Maggie's defiance into smoldering ashes. She could only cling to the marginal relief that he wasn't completely expunging her from the children's lives, even if that meant surrendering her grasp on Jack and Steve. Her sobs became heaving, animalistic wails of anguish as the compounded realities battered her psyche. She was being excised like a cancer, yet couldn't muster any protestation against the draconian treatment. In that moment, Maggie's world shrank to a single point of comprehension. The man towering before her with unmistakable disgust had become virtually unrecognizable from the unconditional, loving partner she'd taken for granted. This wasn't the tender soulmate who'd once cradled her pregnant belly or stood teary-eyed at the altar professing, "Till death do us part." That Tom O'Brien had been thoroughly disintegrated, his ashes calcified into an obsidian monolith of Old Testament vengeance. Under the weight of Tom's scornful, petrifying stare, Maggie saw no choice but capitulation to the reservations he'd so clinically carved out. What alternative could she grasp at from her banished abyss of ill repute? She mutely nodded acceptance, realizing with despair that this complete severance was an almost charitable shuttling towards the purgatory her sins merited. Emma was the only tether keeping her grounded in the wake of this tsunami of consequences. Just when Maggie thought the punishments had reached their nadir, Tom revealed one final masterstroke of vengeance, designed to eternally flay whatever humanity she had remaining. His delivery was as dispassionate as discussing taxes or lawn care, calm evenness masking the sadism lurking beneath. Tom stated he would afford her a mercy of sorts by refraining from publicly releasing the exhaustive dossier of evidence detailing her indiscretions and Emma's likely illegitimate paternity. The reams of testimony, videography, documentation, and DNA proof would stay entombed for now rather than cratering her and Emma with full-bore pariah status. However, concealing this information cache from widespread defamation would come at a scornful price only a depraved bottom feeder like Maggie could process. Tom declared that her lover Brad must tender a cash dad tax penance of $500,000, directly paid into trusts for Jack, Steve, and Emma's benefit. Every last penny would be earmarked to safeguard the children's futures from any further contamination by her lechery and flesh peddling. The dad tax violation made Maggie openly wretched. Having her infidelity materialize into a $500,000 cost was injurious enough, but demanding the hush money be funneled into funds for the very offspring she'd betrayed twisted the dagger with sadistic flourish. It was a filthy back-alley trade, her silence exchanged for Brad's seed funding the children's futures like some seedy underworld protocol. Tom took undisguised pleasure in her discomfort, savoring each agonizing muscle twitch as she processed the degradation. There would be no neutralizing honor in simply paying standard child support like a conscientious father. Instead, Brad's illicit dollars would always reek of their illegitimate origins, a scarlet remittance clawing against his guilt. Every withdrawn tuition cent or medical disbursement would be forever tainted, corpuscular remnants of Maggie and her defiler's transgressions mingling with legitimate family capital. Worst of all for the impenitent whore, accepting these terms instituted a permanent hush directive. Maggie's dossier of eviscerations would remain perpetually suspended like a guillotine blade by Brad's steady indulgence of the dad tax. A single lapse, rebuke, or evasion from him would trigger the evidence landfalling into abyss oblivion for Maggie and Emma as the deserving world learned of their true depraved lineage. It was extortion by any legal definition, and attendant future Tom was sculpting for his offspring's psychological warfare. The ritualistic degradation Tom was subjecting her to felt like an endless series of lashings, each new proclamation a fresh flaying that exposed rawer layers of Maggie's shattered dignity. Yet, as much as the vengeful terms calcified her despair, she found herself internalizing their brutal logic through the haze of anguish. As Tom spelled out the Faustian compact she must bind herself to in order to preserve Emma's innocence, Maggie began viewing it as anemic grace, like a penitent settler accepting banishment over outright execution. Her daughter's unsullied future, unstained by any unbirthing of the grisly truths surrounding her conception, took on talismanic importance amidst the chaos. Maggie's remaining humanity, however scarce, simply couldn't allow that sole flicker of redemption to be extinguished. Sublimating the full psychological damage this would impart, Maggie at last nodded her burdened acquiescence. The whimper of defeat parting her lips unlocked the first inklings of Tom's catharsis, a fleeting glint of satisfaction signaling his ownership of her debased existence from now until its shuttered end. While her forsaken pathway led only into exiled purgatory at Emma's side, he could bask in the assurances that justice and legacy had been meticulously preserved by his own merciless hands. As Maggie's wrecked form crumpled fully in submission before him, Tom felt a euphoric wave of catharsis crest over his very being. This was the abyssal purge he'd been ardently seeking, the alchemical transmogrification of his trauma into profound retributive triumph. The ashes of his adulterated reality had birthed something pristine and utterly uncompromising in its wake. He drank in the vista of Maggie's annihilated pride with the clinical relish of an artist admiring their magnum opus. The once vibrant beauty who had seduced and betrayed him now sat disfigured by the brutality of his judgment, reduced to a humbly acquiescent supplicant. Any embers of the audacious spark that catalyzed her moral arson had been ruthlessly smothered underfoot. Tom knew this scene of Maggie's unconditional surrender would indelibly reaffirm the command of his new domestic order. Like the forensic residues gathered as prosecution exhibits, visual mementos forever imprisoning the scope of a crime, these seared souvenirs would serve as regenerative anchors whenever treacherous doubts tried resurfacing. He had reclaimed total authority through devastation, and Maggie's permanently penitent deference would be his consolation's wellspring. The terms Tom inscribed in that ritualized confrontation came to define Maggie's entire existence going forward. She found herself utterly untethered from the comfortable, prosperous life she had once known, now cast adrift in a solitary exile with only Emma as her small peripheral anchor. Every aspect of her new reality seemed expressly engineered to ostracize and alienate her from any remaining tethers to her previous world. The modest apartment Tom biomechanically procured through clandestine third parties may as well have been a self-contained leper colony for how hermetically distanced it was from their old, affluent social circles. Friends, family, her entire support structure, all preemptively excised by the mere threat of what depravities the evidence cache could unveil about her dissolution. Even securing Emma's enrollment at a new daycare became a harrowing odyssey of masking her ruination's scarlet letters. Paperwork channels were corroded in legal acridities, severing transparent forward momentum, so that week spilled into months of Maggie being subsumed into the surrounding blank walls and furniture. She and Emma became hostage specimens under perpetual padlocked observation, awaiting spiritual extraction year to even re-entering a daylight world where her name could only provoke furious whispers. While Maggie's existence withered into an isolative purgatory alongside Emma, Tom could finally exhale the first tendrils of healing by immersing himself fully into raising Jack and Steve amid the comforting familiarity of their household. With the poisonous interloper excised, he could reclaim the domestic spaces as sanctuaries once again. The First Order was systematically scouring every room of Maggie's tarnished remnants and energies. Tom engaged an industrial cleaning crew to meticulously purify the home's contents, an obsessive unraveling of any lingering physical traces of her moral blight. Clothes, mementos, photographs, all were exorcised to the dumpsters with an adamant finality. Only once the marital bed had been stripped, disinfected, and redressed in fresh linens could Tom finally fall into its comforting embrace again without fear of phantasmic provocations. With the household spiritually decontaminated, Tom endeavored to overwrite any persisting anguishes by injecting new, unblemished joyous memories at every turn. The kitchen that had hosted dread-laced family dinners now rang with laughter as he coached the boys through kiddie baking tutorials. Once dreaded date nights out were repurposed into raucous-themed movie bonanzas, with Steve and Jack piling into his bed, stuffed with junk food among rumpled sheets, sticky with innocent spilled soda. Slowly but resolutely, the shadows were being exorcised from the happy home's nooks and crannies. As the weeks stretched into months, Tom felt the lingering psychic toxins from Maggie's betrayal gradually dissipating like wasteland radiation decaying over time. With steadfast dedication, he was reclaiming the spaces, routines, and familial chapters she had so profanely violated, overriding her transgressions with newly enshrined joys and traditions. The scared bedroom where he had cradled Emma as an infant, tormented by suspicions over her paternity, became a sanctum again. Its closets now brimmed with dress-up chests and superhero capes for hosted rambunctious Ford Funtime sleepovers with the boys. Photo galleries erased the fake happiness rictuses of compulsory family portraiture, now celebrating Jack and Steve's latest missing-tooth grins or karate belt promotions. Most importantly, the financials and legal framework Tom had architected provided unshakable assurances that Maggie's depravity could never disrupt their trajectory again. The hefty dad tax trust funds he had compelled as penance were now self-sustaining eddies funding college savings, medical accounts, even summer camps and orthodontics without another cent needing contribution. Combined with the assets and household Tom had cloistered solely for himself and the boys, their futures were perpetually firewalled from any residual contaminations Maggie's name alone could trigger. With each passing day spent reveling in the tranquility and domesticity he had reclaimed, Tom felt the ache of Maggie's betrayal supplanted by a profound sense of vindication. His campaign of vengeance had been utterly meticulous, as systematic as it was destructive in its purge of her transgressions from his sphere. Savoring the permanence of the demolition, Tom reflected on how the devious contingencies he implemented assured her depraved influences could never again fester into their lives. The highly selective purviewed digital archive of misdeeds, ready to be disseminated at the slightest provocation, guaranteed Maggie's eternal penitence. The trusts underwritten by Brad's hush money indemnities had become untraceable obelisks preserving the legitimacy of the sons Tom had secured. Most crucially, the emotional unburdening achieved by excising Maggie altogether allowed Tom's shattered psyche to become annealed again. Witnessing her humbled acceptance of the exiled, entombed half-life he crafted for her provided a cauterizing spiritual balm. This diabolical deliverance validated the man of integrity he'd fought so viscerally to remain, a protector willing to contort any boundary to safeguard what mattered most. Each log-filled evening together with Jack and Steve was a hard-hearted Valentine giving love thank to Maggie's ashen legacy.